It's about 45 seconds before 10 o'clock, and you're listening to WERU-FM, community radio at 89.9 Blue Hill, 99.9 in Bangor, and streaming at weru.org. We're a voice of many voices. We're volunteer-powered, and we are listener-supported. Don't forget that. Let's take a quick look at the weather in the next 20 seconds. Light snow likely today, mainly after 2 p.m. Cloudy with a high near 16. Light north wind. Chance of precipitation is 70%. Total daytime snow accumulation of less than a half-inch possible, thank goodness. Tonight's snow, mainly before 3 a.m., low around 7, wind chill values as low as minus 11. Light north wind increasing to 11 to 16 miles per hour in the evening, and chance of precipitation is 90%. New snow accumulation 1 to 2 inches possible tonight. Stay tuned for the Writers' Forum.
It's Writers' Forum. Welcome to the show that brings you Maine writers, their voices, and their stories. I'm your host, Ellie O'Leary. For this show, our guests are Mark Scott Ricketts, Mitch Littlefield, and John Ford. Welcome to each of you, and thanks for being here, despite all the iffiness, to say the least, in the weather. Glad you could make it in.
Thank you, Ellie.
Thank you for having us.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, so far we're happy. We'll see how this goes. You know. Our first guest is Mark Scott Ricketts. He's a Maine-based, Arkansas-born illustrator who has enjoyed national success in advertising, graphic novels, and comic books. Mark moved to Chicago in 1979, where he worked as a freelance illustrator for publications like Playboy magazine. He got his big break as a writer and illustrator in 1990 when Calabar Comics agreed to publish his first comic book, Warp Walking. In 2000, Image Comics published Ricketts' graphic novel, Nowheresville, a 1950s mystery that combines Beat Generation culture with hard-boiled pulp crime fiction. After that, Ricketts created many original graphic novels at Image, including Night Trippers and Dioramas, which was optioned by Venture Studios. At Dark Horse, he wrote a graphic novel entitled Lazarus Jack and a short story for Hellboy Weird Tales. At Marvel, he wrote a story arc in The Invincible Iron Man for the Avengers Dissembled event, and in 2000, Ricketts won the Klasky Zupo?
Klasky Zupo.
Klasky Zupo. I should have asked you before the show. Animators of Rugrats and Wild Thornberry screenwriting contest. So you do graphic novels, Mark, and we're on the radio, but we're ready, okay? What are you reading and what are you describing for us today?
I'm going to read a few things, little bits from my book, Flatlander's Guide to Maine, at from Islandport Press. And I'll just start right now with the introduction. Not that long ago, my wife and I dreamed about what it would be like to move from our home in Chicago to the mythical, magical kingdom of Maine, with its unspoiled beauty, tree-littered mountains, glorious waterways, and rocky coast. So, without ever actually stepping foot in the Pine Tree State, we packed up our cat and moved to historic Bangor. The first morning, in our new home, I made my way downtown to Central Street. Curiosity and the smell of fresh bread drew me into the Friar's Bakehouse. While I waited for Brother Don to fetch me a cup of coffee and a blueberry muffin, a man stepped up beside me. "You're not from here," he declared. I smiled at the fellow and proudly replied, "Just moved here." "You don't know about the winters, do you?" he asked with a grim expression. "No, not really, but they can't be any worse than Chicago winters," I replied. And that's when he proceeded to tell me everything needed to survive the upcoming Maine winter. First, he told me to buy a pickaxe and dynamite. "The axe will help you break the coat of ice to get at the snow to shovel your driveway," he said, his arm on my shoulder. "The dynamite is for clearing the snowdrifts from your front porch. Last year, the drifts got as high as 20 feet or more." While I choked on a bit of muffin, He also cautioned me about summers. The man described some kind of blood-sucking, winged monster as big as a chihuahua and twice as mean. Called them black flies. Saw one pick up a child and fly it back to its nest, he said. He also warned me about the moose population. They be crazy. Never know when one might jump up out of nowhere, take a run at your car, and just ram it. Shredded metal, glass, antlers, a real mess. Well, that fella, he just about scared me half to death. But the funny thing is, I found out later that this man who was so intent on frightening me, well, he wasn't even a native Mainer. He wasn't from Maine at all. He was from Massachusetts. So, suffice it to say, his depiction of Maine life turned out to be wildly exaggerated. Except for that bit about the moose. They do be crazy. Here's another piece. It's actually supposed to be said with a Maine accent. I really don't do one, so I apologize.
I would suggest probably most of our listeners prefer you just use your accent and don't try.
Yeah.
If there's anything we don't like.
I completely understand that.
We have Maine accents coming up, trust me.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Okay. My grandfather met Abraham Lincoln and his wife way back when he was head cook up to Vice President Hamlin's Bangor mansion. The first family had come to visit, and it was grandfather's job to figure out what to serve them for supper. He chose lobster so as to give them a taste of authentic New England cooking. In fact, it was him told the vice president that, for fun, he should have his honored guests drop by the kitchen. Thought they might like to pick out their own lobster. And just to give them an extra thrill, he suggested they should stick round and see how those suckers got cooked. Well, the vice president was keen to show his guests a good time, and he for sure wanted them to take in the local color, so he agreed that'd be a fine idea. It didn't quite turn out the way they planned, though, because when Mrs. Lincoln caught sight of those caged and skittering critters, well, their snapping pinchers and beady black eyes made her go to twitching. When grandfather dropped one of them in boiling water and it turned red as the devil, well, Mrs. Lincoln had herself a conniption fit. She got to screaming so much the president had to wrestle her down. Years later, the vice president told my grandfather that Mrs. Lincoln completely lost her mind. And they'd packed her off to the booby hatch. My grandfather thought on it a mite, looked the vice president in the eyes, and replied, "Guess I should have served clams." Here's one more, and it's about my favorite delicacy, the fiddlehead.
Oh.
Nice.
You know, in some places, the fiddlehead is considered the red-haired stepchild of the vegetable family. Why, some folks act like the fiddlehead's not sophisticated enough to sit alongside the all-too-refined asparagus, or your snootier variety of lettuce, such as the regal romaine. Fiddleheads get treated with even less respect than some of your working-class leafy vegetables like collard, turnip, or mustard greens. If vegetation had to go to grammar school, you know the fiddleheads would be the ones bullied out on the schoolyard. They'd get Indian burns, nipple cripples, wet willies, noogies, wedgies, and they'd most likely be pantsed. However, just like a high school geek might transform into a billion-dollar software architect, the fiddlehead, under proper supervision, can be transformed into a culinary delicacy.
Yes, we love fiddleheads. Well, I like them. I don't know. I met somebody once. Somebody said, "Oh yeah, he fiddleheads." I said, "Well, what does he do for a living?" He said, "No, he collects fiddleheads." I said, It's kind of seasonal work, isn't it? I mean, I'm not sure what you do now. But thank you. You're really welcome. You're really joining Maine, aren't you?
Oh, absolutely.
You're into it now, Are you just joining us? You're listening to Writers Forum on WERU-FM, 89.9 Blue Hill and 99.9 Bangor. As you may have heard already, we are having a pledge drive now at WERU. Most of the voices you hear here are volunteers, but the station still has expenses. Pledging is easy with no minimum pledge amount. You can become a new member for any amount you choose. Even if you are already a member, you can give an additional gift in recognition of a particular show or endeavor. Please pick up the phone, give us a call, 1-800-643-6273. Without you, there would be no Writers Forum. And the number is 1-800-643-6273. And I want to give a special thanks to Kathy from Blue Hill, who gave an additional gift, and she plans her day around Writers Forum. I can't tell you how much that's appreciated, very much. I'll also be telling you later in the show about a drawing. Everybody who pledges during the news or public affairs shows will be entered into a drawing that will be drawn Friday at 5. Next up, our next guest is author Mitch Littlefield. His book, Memories of Shucking Peas, is due to be released later this month with North Country Press. The book contains 25 short stories depicting warm, humorous slices of life on the family farms where he was raised. Born in 1956 in Belfast to a large family, his fondest memories growing up include the storytelling that his elders practiced while working side by side on the farms. He's been writing stories about family and those farms since he was in grade school. He says, storytelling is an art form that is fading away with each generation, and one that I cherish from my own childhood years when my grandfather and my uncles would spin yarns that never grew old to my ears and always stimulated my overactive imagination. It has become my mission at this stage of my life to be that storyteller of my generation. After high school, I moved from the farm and tried my hand at many things ranging from, I don't mean to laugh, but we've all tried our hands at so many things.
I still am.
Yes, still trying his hands at many things, ranging from working in the chicken factories in Belfast, I remember those, to becoming a licensed stockbroker, along with multiple other incarnations. He's experienced many different perspectives in life, and each of them have their own stories to be told. So storytelling is not fading away with you in charge, huh, Mitch?
Well, it was a big part of my childhood, and some of my fondest memories was when the whole family would get together for Thanksgiving or Christmas or whatever occasions. That a big part of that time was spent listening to stories being told by my uncles, my grandfather, even my grandmother. So,
great. And you've got one for us now.
I
right?
do have
At least
one.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, so this one is entitled Animal Olympics. One of the more subtle things that I liked to watch as a kid growing up on the 3 farms my family operated was the community that existed between various breeds of animals and the even clearer relationship between animals of a common breed. It was interesting to see how the sheep would interact with the cows or how the horses and ducks got along. To the casual observer, the larger animals went where they wanted and the smaller breeds would move out of their way. Otherwise, they would tend to ignore each other. Not always the case. The pecking order on the farm was not necessarily breed-specific, although sometimes it was. For example, the horses were the kings of the pasture. They were the largest, strongest, fastest, and one of the more intelligent of the animals. The cows intermingled easy enough with the horses, as they offered no aggression towards the horses or anything or anyone else either. In fact, the horses would typically look after the cows and would alert them to the fact if something was askew, such as somebody walking through the pasture on his way to the creek with a fishing pole over his shoulder. The horses would watch intently, while the cows seemed not to notice. They would be contentedly chewing away at the green grass. However, if the horses felt encroached upon, or nervous, and started moving away from the stranger in the pasture, then the cows would dutifully follow them to the other section of the pasture. If a bull in season was added to the mix, the horses basically figured the cows were on their own and stayed away from them. It's kind of funny, 11 months out of the year, most of the bulls that we had were as docile and frankly as stupid as the cows. But when they were in season, they became highly combative and were to be avoided. I remember one day when I was a teenager, I was at my Uncle Gene's farm, and I decided to climb a golden delicious apple tree inside the pasture about 30 feet from the road. My intent was to snag a few of those delicious apples. As it happened, this bull we called Old Blue took offense to the fact that I was in his crib. He decided to express his displeasure by headbutting the tree while I was in it. And then he decided to wait me out, pawing and snorting at the base of the tree.
That's what a bull in season does.
Yeah, this particular one did. Cousin Jeannie Bub and Unc Gene thought this was highly entertaining as they were watching from the porch and laughing it up. I figured I wouldn't starve at least. The apples were really, really good. Ironically, I was in this predicament because I figured I would score me some brownie points with Unc Gene. These were his favorite apples, and I intended to take him a few of the more pristine ones that I picked. The two of them did attempt to be helpful, however, as Jeannie hollered over, "Jump down and ride him." I recall that I dropped a fantastically perfect apple accidentally when I gave Cuz the old one-finger salute at this suggestion. The apple, in fact, bounced off the head of Old Blue, which was akin to throwing a cotton ball at a rock. It did, however, give me an idea. I figured maybe I could entice the bull to chase after a few apples and forget about me. I really didn't need much. It was only 30 feet to the gate. Life lesson number 9989. Bulls, don't eat apples or chase them. Life lesson number 9990. One should never start throwing a bunch of Uncle's favorite apples all over the pasture. At least Uncle stopped laughing at me and made Jeannie send his dog Rax to the pasture to yap and drive Old Blue back to the herd of cows some 300 feet away in the lower end of the pasture. None of the animals messed with the dog. The dog was the Uber drill sergeant of the farmyard. And I didn't mess with Unc Gene. I had to retrieve all those apples I threw, all the while keeping a wary eye on Old Blue. It's important to note here that my family also operated a farm we dubbed the Other Farm, which abutted Unc Gene's farm. The other farm was where most of the livestock was kept, and the animals could easily be moved from one pasture or even one farm to another. These two farms totaled about 350 acres of pasture, hayfields, a couple of farm ponds, a fantastic trout stream, and about 100 acres of forest, or as we say here in Maine, woods. It remains to this day the most beautiful land in the county. Anyway, watching the sheep was another interesting slice of barnyard culture. The sheep typically stayed together in a scattered cluster, but off to themselves. Sheep are one of the most defenseless animals I've ever known, and so they tend to stay away from all the other animals, which is somewhat of a paradox. They would be much safer if they stayed amongst the other animals. This became an ever-increasing problem as the coyote population here in Maine continued to grow through the 1970s.
Oh, yeah.
Coyotes terrorized the sheep, on occasion killing several a night. To further complicate the problem, coyotes are incredibly resourceful, very intelligent, and almost impossible to stop. They're too smart to be trapped. Poisoning them was out of the question, and hunting them was almost laughable. The only real option was to let them come to you, which meant spending many a night sitting in the old 49 Willys Jeep, hidden in the bushes, on the edge of the pasture with high-powered rifles, hoping for enough moonlight to pick up one in the scout. Coyotes hunt at night, another sign of their cleverness. They usually hunted in packs of 3 or 4, but sometimes there would only be one. They are very fast, ruthless, and fearless. Typically, they would make the kill quickly, eat the organs, the heart, the lungs, the liver, and then escape to the woods to hunt another night. They would come in cycles, never staying in the same patch of woods or feasting off the same farm for more than a few nights. Again, very clever animals. Unc Gene discovered a way to tell if his sheep were going to be attacked that night, which I have always thought epitomized the term good old Yankee ingenuity. He came to realize that vultures would begin to flock to the farm and perch on the fences at the edge of the woods just before dark. Unc understood that the vultures followed the coyotes and would feast on the remains of the kill once the coyotes had their fill and had run off into the woods. Unc Gene and Cousin Jeannie were both excellent marksmen and shot many coyotes over the course of time. Some of us other men in the family would take our turns from time to time and join them in the all-night vigilance of protecting the herd. We were basically there just to offer company. The real responsibility of sitting there night after long night always fell on their shoulders. Still, they would be there on the farm the next day working side by side with the others. The only time the sheep would naturally intermingle with the other animals was during the winter months when they couldn't graze. Then they were forced to eat from the common piles of hay that we tossed out each morning and night from the haymow. The sheep had a very noticeable community within the flock. I always marveled at how a mother sheep and her lambs could distinguish each other's bleats from the cacophony of hundreds of such bleats in this cluster of over 400 head. I also found it very heartwarming when a mother sheep would accept a lamb whose mother had not survived as her own. That didn't always happen. In fact, it wasn't common, but it happened enough to appreciate the community of these sheep. More often, one of us kids would become the surrogate mother to a little lamb who had lost its mother, bottle feeding it until it was grown enough to fend for itself. It was the lambs that were such a joy to watch. Sheep typically have twins, sometimes a single lamb, sometimes triplets, very rarely more than that, but most often it's twins. When the lambs are very young, they stay very close to mom, and the brother-sister tandems become inseparable. They tend to chase each other around, work their headbutting skills on each other, vie for mom's attention and her milk, and generally seem to be getting a big kick out of life. They even appear to be smiling joyfully as they bleat and jump, kicking their heels and wiggling their tails. In the easternmost pasture beside the road at the other farm was an old manure pile. This pile had been there for years, and over the course of time it had had thousands of hooves compacted into a 4-foot knoll in the middle of the pasture. It was about 30 feet in diameter, and the surrounding ground was very flat, so it became something of a landmark. Just before dark in the late spring of the year, all the lambs would gather in a big circle around this pile. The lambs were about 2 months old by this time and were becoming very agile and incredibly playful. The lambs would circle this knoll, and then it would start. Games of tag. 2 or 3 of the lambs would rush at each other over the top of the pile and then run back to their place in the circle. Then another 2 or 3 would do the same, and so on. This game they played was incredibly orderly. They seemed to be showing off for each other, to see who could jump the highest, click his hoofs together, or who could wiggle his tail the most vigorously. Sometimes they would jump over each other and chase each other in circles around one of the pear trees, all the while bleating happily. The mother ewe would stand back 20 feet or so from the circle to oversee the affair and watch their young uns play. Then, as darkness fell over the barnyard, the mama ewe and her lambs would find each other and look for a hollow or an alcove of bushes or that prime property in behind the old hay conveyor for the night's lodging accommodations. They would lay snuggled up with each other in a circle, and the farmyard would become almost silent as the little ones first nursed and then drifted off to sleep, dreaming the dreams of baby lambs. Watching this animal Olympics never failed to validate for me all that is pure and naturally beautiful in life. It made me feel good to be alive, and it always made me realize how fortunate I was to be part of this family and this farm. It still remains one of the sweetest memories of my youth. It actually became quite a pastime for a lot of folks around here. On many early evenings, the driveway leading into the other farm would have several vehicles sitting there with a family inside, eating ice cream cones and watching the lambs as they played their bedtime games.
Oh.
I believe that if all of us had the opportunity to take a half hour at the end of the day and spend it with our family, friends, and neighbors, watching those lambs rejoice in the simple beauty of life, we would appreciate our own lives more.
Oh, indeed.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Oh, that's really nice. Yeah.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mitch. Now, what town are these farms in? In Belfast?
Belfast.
In Belfast?
Yeah.
Belfast has more retirees than farms now, I think.
The
Maybe
farm
I hang out at senior college too much, but
Yeah, well, I think farming overall throughout the country
Yeah.
is dying. It's become either you're huge and it's a big conglomerate. The family farm is really a thing of the past. There are a few
Yeah.
that remain. The Keene Dairy Farm, for example. My cousin still has livestock on that same farm, but it's very small.
right. Right.
That life is something that we have to talk about in stories because it's just no longer there.
You have to preserve those stories. I mean, the families on the driveway watching the
Yeah.
the lambs.
I
That's
think one of the
yeah.
biggest ones is Whitcomb's farm out there
Yes.
on the out in Waldo and
Yeah, I was going to say
The
on
Birches
137. Yeah.
Birches Road, and Walter Whitcomb, who's the Commissioner of Agriculture right now, was telling me his mother is 90 years old
Yeah.
and she's still working in the barn.
Yeah, I lived out in Waldo for 18 years, and Walter's father, Colby, was the tax collector. And
Yeah.
when he finally stepped down, they did a reassessment, and everybody's taxes doubled. So I don't think Colby had done it in a while.
That's right.
Oh, I love the old town stories, and as I've mentioned on the show before, I grew up in Freedom, which is right in this area. Yeah, so yeah, I can truly appreciate these stories. Well, thanks, Mitch. You're listening to Writers Forum on WERU-FM. John Ford is going to be up next, but first I want to remind our listeners that community radio is based on the concepts of listener support and volunteer power. WERU exists because of the generosity of its members, which we hope includes you. Therefore, please donate by calling the pledge line 1-800-643-6273 or by giving online anytime. And this week, this Funathon, as we call it, we're having a special book giveaway for Funathon. Everyone who calls to pledge during a news or public affairs program, such as this one, this week will be entered into a drawing for the book. And the book is This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate by Naomi Klein, award-winning author of No Logo and the Shock Doctrine and contributing editor to Harper's Magazine. Please call in your pledge to get into the drawing. Again, I know I said it. I'll say it again. It's 1-800-643-6273. And the winner's name will be drawn this Friday afternoon at 5 p.m., just before Democracy Now! And we know John Ford will be listening. So John Ford, who's here with us, was raised in York County in a family that was law enforcement oriented, including his grandfather, his father, and his stepfather. His mother rehabilitated wildlife for the Fish and Game Department for several years, so it seemed only natural that John would pursue a law enforcement career in wildlife enforcement. He was appointed a district game warden in 1970 and assigned to Central Maine. He then served the Waldo County area as a game warden for 20 years until 1990. John and his wife, Judith, have one son, John Jr., who lives in Troy with his wife, Amy, and their 3 children, Lucas, Elizabeth, and Anna Grace. John created and marketed the Sportsman Wildlife Calendar in 1983 as a hobby. John's also an artist. There's 2 illustrators here with us today. This popular wildlife calendar sold around the country from 1983 to 2000. After retiring from the warden service in 1990, John was elected sheriff, so the sheriff's at the house, for Waldo County, where he served from 1991 to 99 and again in 2001. We'll get off he did great law enforcement things, but we want to get on to his writing. He wrote a bi-weekly article for the Republican Journal. I used to see it in the Republican Journal all the time, from 2000 to 2009, detailing memories from his warden's diaries. I remember thinking, that guy should put these together and make it a memoir, you know. John received a second-place award in 2005 and a first-place award in 2007 from the Maine Press Association's Better Newspaper contest for his columns, and he was selected by his peers as legendary game warden in 2000. And I have to go to another page. Today, John Ford is contributing columnist for Northwood Sporting Journal. In between the many speaking engagements and book signings, John serves civil process for the Waldo County Sheriff's Office. He's still in that business. John now has 2 books, Suddenly, The Cider Didn't Taste So Good, and This Cider Still Tastes Funny. And he's currently working on the 3rd Madness, which you mentioned before the show is also going to come out with North Country Press.
North Country Press, right.
And they're based in Unity. So John is reading/telling his story. So if you're trying to read along, you might be he might get you confused. He's like that. So go ahead, John. What have you got for us today?
Well, first of all, I'd like to be like Mac, and I want to try my Arkansas accent.
Okay,
so
yeah.
if I can get the Arkansas accent down, and
we're picking up on that right off.
And as I hear Mitch tell the stories about the cows, it makes me think of an incident where in Unity, when I was a warden, we got a call one morning that it was a real foggy morning. I got a call from the state police that there was a plane that was missing that was last taken off from the Waterville Airport, headed for Bangor, and they got an emergency locator on it, but they didn't know where it was at. So we had to head out looking for it. And how this ties in with Mitch's story is that we all was hunting for this plane, thinking the worst, not knowing how many people was on it. And That plane, actually, the pilot was flying over Unity in the fog when a rudder problem ended up with the plane, and he was circling thinking he'd drop the plane down into the water and that'd be the better chance of survival. As he came over Unity Pond, there was an opening that came up in the fog, and he saw a cow pasture. And so he brought the plane down in the cow pasture, and I was one of the first ones to get at the scene. And I can remember talking to one of those passengers as she got off the plane, and she says, I never was so scared in my life. That plane bounced into that pasture, and when we finally stopped, there was 8 cows looking in the window. So, the curiosity of these things are just amazing. And then, to hear you telling about the coyotes, when I first came to Unity as a game warden in 1970, the department was denying that we had coyotes. They called them coy dogs, and the first one I remember being killed was in South Unity, and it was struck by a car. And I can remember the Waterville Sentinel come over and took a bunch of pictures of it. But you look at them now, and the whole state is flooded with these things.
When I was growing up in Maine, there were no coyotes. Coyotes were like things that lived out west or something. It was no such thing.
Yeah.
I know I was on Curtis Road in Monroe one time, and an animal came out in front of the car, and I thought, oh, that's a really... somebody should take better care of their dog.
Right.
Like, what, And then I realized, oh, yes.
Yeah.
I only grew up around here. I'm really not much of an outdoors person. That's nobody's dog.
And I'll tell you, they're real killers. I mean,
Yeah.
but it's a matter of survival. And
Very intelligent animals.
they're very intelligent, very intelligent.
Oh, we
So-
maybe wish they weren't. Yeah.
Right, right. So to get to my book, I've got the first one done. The second one, This Cider Still Tastes Funny. It's 40 different stories, short stories. What I did is I kept a diary when I was a warden, so I tried to keep the stories to the actual events that happened out in the field. I tried to keep it humorous, and because I think a lot of people don't realize what goes on in their backyard in the still of the night or whatever, and if you can make them smile and give them a little idea of what really does go on in the backyard. And when I was a game warden, I think the thing that I found out, my stepfather told me that when I first came to Waldo County, that these poachers are going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. Don't take it serious, because most of the time they're going to get by with it. And so he was the one that advised me to keep the diary, and I'm some glad I did, because I've got so many of those stories that I can tell. And these are real short, and I'm not one for reading them, but I like telling the stories. I've hooked up with a retired trooper, Mac Nickerson from Unity, who has his own book out, and we go around giving talks at various groups, libraries and Rotary clubs. And
You call yourself the Old Cops, right?
Oldcops.com.
Right.
We're a couple of old cops that go out there, and if we can leave that audience laughing, then we've accomplished our job. And so it's kind of fun sharing the stories. I think one of them I got in this book tells about the time I was on Unity Pond. When I first came out here, the white perch was spawning along the shoreline, and the shore of Unity Pond was just right full of fishermen. People was catching the perch, some for chowder, some for fertilizer for their garden, and the perch was biting pretty good. So I had a pretty good day out on the pond. It was a real hot day, and I'd left my car at the boat landing in Unity. And when I came home, came back, I put the boat onto the trailer and went home. Well, a few days later, as I started to drive, my car had a wicked smell to it, and a stench that I just couldn't figure out what was going on. I'd wash it and I'd clean it, but the minute I drove, it would stink. And about 3 weeks later, I was going down the Abbott Road in Knox, the dirt road, and I had a flat tire. Oh. So when I got out, I jacked the car up. When I popped the hubcap off in the car, it was right full of white perch. And someone had filled all 4 of my hubcaps with white perch. And, of course, they'd been about 1,000 miles grinding around, and it was one of the most sickening things that... So I thought that I won't mention this to anybody, and sooner or later someone's gonna want to know something about it. And it ended up with a young fellow who used to pump my gas at the local gas station in Unity. I went in to get gas one day, and he mentioned the fact that, hey, he says, I heard your car stunk pretty bad not long ago. And so I took him for a little ride, and we had a little hat-to-hat. Come find out it was he and his buddy that had done that while I was out on the lake.
Isn't that the local way? If you say nothing,
Oh yeah, yeah.
somebody's gonna.
Someone can't stand it. They
Yeah,
want to know
yeah.
that. So anyway, I ended up getting my cruiser washed anytime I wanted by these two guys, and I didn't take any court action. But you really had to admire these guys for doing what they did. I don't know, even though it was a prank.
Wrong but clever.
Wrong but clever. And unfortunately, I ended up going to an accident one night, and that fellow was killed in a car accident.
Oh.
And he and another fellow, and he got to be a pretty good friend of mine actually. And his sister went on to become a state trooper. She's state trooper down in Newport right now, ready to retire. So you make acquaintances while you're into the community that's just invaluable. I mean, you make a lot of the poachers that I dealt with are my best friends today, and that old cat and mouse game. That's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was a cat and mouse game, and. So
It wasn't enough to get away with it. They wanted you to know that
right.
they got away with it.
You remember fact? I think I remember some Littlefields that might have been in on that. I don't.
I'm sure that there's some in your stories.
Yeah. I don't know of any Ricketts, but I'll check back on the
You
file.
used to eat a lot of deer meat, John.
Well, and it's funny you mention it because when I came to Unity in 1970, you didn't have the welfare programs that you've got now. And poaching was a way of life for that northern Waldo County.
Absolutely.
And a lot of those people was actually, with some of them, farmers and stuff, big families, and they were shooting deer, and it was a matter of survival for the family. So we had two things that was actually working. You had the poacher that you wanted to shut down because he was making money off the deer he killed, and you had the farmer who was trying to feed his family. And so my sole purpose at that time is I concentrated on the poacher. And, because I figured the farmer had fed the deer all year long. If he went out behind the man at night and blistered one and dragged it in and,
It's a sort of civil disobedience. I mean,
Right.
hunting to feed your family
Right.
is not hunting for the thrill of selling parts or something like
Right.
that. Totally different. Mhm.
It was a different way of life. And, it ended up as time went on that, the welfare programs come in. And we used to take deer when we had road kills, or if I got an illegal deer, we'd give it to those families that really needed it. And
Well, if you hit a deer with a car, are you allowed to? I
You
mean,
can
I don't
have
want it personally, but
yeah, you can have it, and if you don't want it, then we have there's a list actually that the sheriff's office have in Waldo County of people that will
they
take
will take
any
it and come out and,
right.
and take care of
Yeah,
it. You know.
we used to be able to give it to schools. Used to be able to give it to schools or nursing homes or hospitals for their own purpose. But now the federal government's come in and everything's got to be federally inspected. So.
I wouldn't know what to do with. I mean, frankly, my sister
You
hit
eat
a
it.
well, yeah. I should drive with a spoon. Huh?
Come on, Ellie, you're from Freedom
I know.
originally.
I know. My sister hit a moose up near Greenville, and I said, "What did you do with it?" She said, "I don't know." Maybe it was in the middle of the night. Her car was being towed.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened to that moose, but I know she's not going to cut it up and
Right.
and put it in white freezer paper and stuff like.
Well, and you take a moose, there's a lot of meat on
Oh,
there, and,
yeah.
and feed a lot of families, so it's too bad to leave it just go to waste. So
Exactly.
there
I
are
don't-
those people that I can remember when I was sheriff, we used to have these people call up and they'd say, if you get an extra deer or an extra moose or something, give us a call. We don't care what time of the day or night, and we'll come out. And so those people are there, and so yeah, it was a great career, and certainly one that I have no regrets of doing. And
Oh no.
you get
Yeah.
and even a lot of the people that I arrested. I mean, it's the Burnham people. When I first came up here, they had the poachers actually had a slush fund where they'd all get together, and they would put so much money into it, and if anybody got caught violating fish and game laws, and there was a big fine, that money didn't come out of that individual's pocket; it came out of the slush fund. So. One of the poachers that I had, and this was probably the most heartwarming thing I think of my career, is when I finally decided to leave the warden service and run for sheriff, which was a political campaign. I got a letter from one of those guys I'd had in court time and time again. And in that letter was a check for $200. And he said something about, he says, John, please use this money towards your campaign, and we hope the hell you get elected, because then we'll know where you are for a change. And you know, I thought, well, that's quite a treat. So it actually ended. And then I got thinking about it. You know, he didn't pay for that out of his pocket. That came from that damn slush fund. They all paid for it.
Right,
So,
yeah.
and when I was sheriff, I was starting to see these kids coming into the jail that was the offspring of
the
those
offspring
that
of
I
the,
dealt
yeah.
with. So,
Right. You helped feed them.
yeah. So it was a great experience, and you know, to hear Mitch tell the stories about the farms in Waldo County, they're priceless. And to hear Mac tell about coming to Maine and packing up.
And appreciating and
And
packing
it-
up your cat.
yeah.
And coming, oh, yeah, Maine, what could go wrong?
Yeah, exactly.
I got to tell you, when I first came to Waldo County, I never was accepted as a Maine resident because I lived 3 miles from the New Hampshire border, and the people
yeah.
down there always said, "You're not a Mainer. You're too close to New Hampshire." So I
Yeah,
never
I mean,
did
Shapley,
qualify.
Shapley is like, that's part of Massachusetts practically.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah,
Yeah.
It's that close. So.
Same thing with me. I didn't move to Maine until I was 10, so I will never be a Mainer. And I haven't been 10 for a long time.
Well, I can tell you, coming from such a large family that is generational in Waldo County, 17th generation, for example, for to be
Wow.
specific. Yeah, and all of my family, farmers or woodcutters, very rural people. I can tell you that every one of them is very aware of who the local game warden is, and John was always welcome when he came by because he was always fair and he was always direct and honest.
And he's got great stories from his career.
He has wonderful
now,
stories.
What kind of stories are going to be in the third book?
Well, I've got, they're going to be the same thing. I mean, what I try to do is I use the actual episodes out in the field. And, you know, I try to take out as many cuss words as I can, but you can't deal in law enforcement without telling the stories that really happened. And
You can't be on radio either.
And
But
you, yeah, you've warned me 4 times already, Ellie. But, you know, I just look back at it, and I look at, I think the thing that really wanted me to get into law enforcement, my grandfather was the second police chief for the town of Sanford way back in the 1920s.
Oh.
And when he got through being, he didn't like that job because it didn't come with a pay raise, and he joined the Maine State Police in 1929. And the state police, I don't know how many people know it, but the state police at that time, when they patrolled that York County area, or the state of Maine, they didn't patrol in cruisers. They patrolled in Harley-Davidson motorcycles with sidecars on them.
Yeah.
And,
As they probably, each man, and I'm sure they were all men at the time,
Yeah.
probably had to cover a lot of miles.
they did, and they didn't have radios. The only
Right.
way he knew he had a call when he went through the Berwicks up through Shapley or Sanford, when he went by the post office or the drugstore, if there's a red flag hanging off the telephone pole, it meant he had to find a phone, call the barracks in Wells, find out what the complaint was, go take care of that complaint, and then find a phone and let him know that he was all set. If they didn't hear from him for a while, they'd send another Holly out looking for him. So, I mean, I got to hear those stories. And then my dad was a part-time deputy sheriff, and my mom and dad divorced when I was fairly young, and my mother married the game warden, and we had a house full of wild critters that all kinds of animals. I used to have a fisher sleep on my pillow at night that we
A
raised.
Fisher cat?
Fisher cat. And we had a pet skunk by the name of Molly. This is a great story. Molly was, we got her when she wasn't descended, but her eyes went open, and so she used to stay underneath our couch. And the Avon lady came to the house one day, and my mom and her was sitting on the couch with a catalog spread out between them. And Molly came out from underneath the couch and began digging at her shoes. Well, a woman, thinking it was a cat, reached down, batted her upside the head, and drove her back underneath the couch again. So Molly didn't take to that too kindly. A few minutes later, she came back out and was digging at the lady's shoes again. And that woman looked down, saw that black foam with a white stripe on it. She let a screech out of it, blew the wax right out of our ears. I had to take her catalogs out to the car, and I think we was put on the do not call list from that
Oh, I
point
bet,
on.
yeah.
So.
I bet, the original.
But you know, I've really had the good life. I think Maine is the Maine people. They're original, and you know, and they're very independent, and You know, and I found out as a game warden how independent they can be, and so.
Right. Do you have a title for your third book?
I don't.
Okay.
No, we're looking for one, and
I'll make one up. No.
yeah, I'm
He's
sure.
afraid I will.
Yeah. No, it's been a good ride, and I've just had a ball doing this. And Mac Nickerson and I, when we're going around speaking, we've been to, I think, 80-some libraries in the state of Maine last year.
Right, and New Hampshire too. I mean,
New
yeah.
Hampshire, we went down to Plastown, New Hampshire last week, and you know, and we're going. I think we'll be at the Chamber of Commerce in Pittsfield in next week. We're going to be there. Last week I was down at Stockton Springs Library. And
Yeah, Maine's got a great writing community. Maine's got a lot of opportunities.
unbelievable.
Independent bookstores, people.
Yeah.
I was telling you before the show, I went to hear Carolyn Shute read at Gulf of Maine Books in Brunswick. There's all up and down the coast, especially seems maybe I just know the coast more.
Exactly.
But there's all sorts of independent bookstores, and they
Right.
love to have local writers come in and read.
But you notice when we went down to Plastown, New Hampshire, the librarian, the head librarian down there, he brought his daughter into the ceremony that we had, the talk that we had, and afterwards he came up and he said, he says that was a great presentation, but my daughter couldn't understand half of what she was talking because of that. So that's why I'd like to learn the Arkansas
Right,
accent.
yeah, right,
maybe.
yeah. Oh, that's good. It's good for her to hear it, though, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
And I didn't realize, a lot of the people say, you've got that Maine accent. Well, I don't understand it as a Maine accent. Do you think it's a Maine accent, Ellie?
I notice it, and I notice it because when I left Freedom, I went right from Freedom, Maine. After I graduated from Montview, I went to Bates College in Lewiston, Maine. And now that's not very far in miles, and
Right.
we're still within the same state.
Right.
And people were making fun of my accent. And I was saying, but wait, and I sounded more like you. And
Yeah.
but we're in Maine. We're in Maine, and you're making
Yeah.
fun of my Maine accent. And it was in Lewiston on the Bates campus that I started to lose my real old time, like John, Maine accent. And now, like when people, sometimes like friends of mine, like around the country, will listen to the show because it's streams,
Right.
and they'll listen to the archive, and they'll say, "Oh, we just love hearing your New England accent." And probably what I have is because I've also lived in Massachusetts and back and forth. I probably have a sort of broad-based New England accent, not as distinctly Maine as it once was.
But
So I
it's
do
kind of
notice it, yeah.
embarrassing. I had a deputy that went to Idaho, became a game warden out there. So I flew out with him, and we're on the plane, and stewardess come up, and she said, excuse me, she says, where are you from? Are you from down under? And I said, down under where?
Not going there yet.
She thought I was saying, and
Yeah.
I wanted to throw her out to the emergency door. I mean, I
You're
just
such a nice guy, John.
Well, I think sometimes it depends on who you deal with in the course of the day. I spent a lot
Yeah.
of years working at MBNA, and I'm talking to hundreds of people
Yeah.
every day on the phone.
Right.
So your diction and you kind of lose that accent. And then, maybe on the weekend I'd go hang out with my cousins and my uncles on the farm, and I'd go back in the following Monday, and I'd have to go in and practice losing that Maine accent again.
I have
So-
the same thing because my family was from Ireland. My father
Yeah.
was from Cork, and I was raised by my father. My mother died when I was quite young. And so he sounded American except for just certain things. And being around people who spoke English but were from Ireland was so normal for me
Yeah.
that I would find that if I'm with Irish people from Ireland, I'm afraid I'm going to sound like I'm mimicking them. But I'm not. It's just like you say, like you spoke one way over the phone and one way with your cousins, and and so my word order and things like that would sound more Irish. But
Well, and I think some of it is if you're not from Maine, then there's some things you're just not gonna understand.
Fiddleheads.
I have.
You have to come and hear about them.
I have cousins. There's 5 brothers, and they can make an entire conversation out of one word. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's all about the voice inflection, and so.
You know,
try spelling it. Yeah.
Yeah.
when we was in warden school, now they taught us the French Canadian lingo,
Oh, yeah.
one word at a time. And I hadn't been out of warden school very long when a group from Quebec had hit a deer on Route 9 in Troy. So the trooper called me up and he says, "I can't get through to these people. Would you come over and what he was trying to get me to do, tell them they could have a room at Unity College for the night. So I look through my book, and I write all this stuff down, and I get out there, and I tell these guys what I think is you can have a room at Unity. They fell right to their knees laughing. Now, here's their car totaled. I don't know to this day what I told them guys, but I never tried that again afterwards. And that trooper says, "What did you just do there?" I said, "Don't call me again on my friend." I'm not.
I think you might have offered them a room, but
I don't know what I said.
you don't know what we said. No, I want to give some information on our guest today. I mean, this is Writers Forum on WERU-FM 89.9 Blue Hill and 99.9 Bangor. I'm your host, Ellie O'Leary. Our guests are Mark Scott Ricketts, who can be contacted later at M. Scott Ricketts, MSCOTTRICKETTS.com. That's his website. And Mitch Littlefield has been one of our guests, and he can be contacted at Mitch@minormeadow.com. And Mitch is one of those clever people. Minor Meadow is easy to remember because it's like Littlefield. So it's Mitch at minor, MINOR, meadow, MEADOW.com. And John Ford can be reached or be found if you're looking for him. I'll help you. But if you're looking for him, you can find him at mainewarden.com, MAINEWARDEN.com. And Old Cops, OLDCOPS. I know you can spell Old Cops. I'm just being nice, .com. And so that's the best place to get in touch with them later if you want to hear. John has a new book coming out. Do you have a date for that new book coming out? A few months?
Actually, I'm hoping to meet with the publisher North Country Press this week. We were supposed to set up something, but she wants to do an audio book too. And Mac, I may have to get together with you and have you straighten out some of that.
I was thinking as Mark was doing his stories, if I ever do an audio book, I wanted to do it myself. But after hearing him speak, I may want him to do it.
And Mitch, when is your book coming out? What is it called again?
Memories of Shocking Peas.
Memories of Shocking Peas.
Which is actually one of the stories inside the book, but I also use that as a title. I really don't know. I talked with Pat just a couple of days ago at North Country Press, and as I said, when I get home today, I think my manuscript will be there. So it's a process still of going through that and then getting a proof. I would guess that would be very lucky to have it done by the end of the month, but I would certainly think it would be...
Probably in March, at least.
It would be released by sometime the middle of March. And then at that point in time, I will be doing a launch party and some book readings, and I may start following John around. Who knows?
Right. The local bookstores will be interested to have a local author. I mean, I haven't spoken to all of them, but it's what I'm thinking.
There does seem to be a pretty high degree of anticipation. I've been getting a great deal of support on this, which is very gratifying. And so I'm looking forward to it. And as John said, it's been a great ride, and I'm trying to enjoy every minute of it.
And what do you have coming up next, Mark?
Well, Islandport is going to wag a finger at me if I don't tell you that I have a children's book, a picture book that's in stores right now called Adventures in Vacation Land. Oh. And so go out and pick that up.
Is that what I'm looking at?
Yeah, it is. That's this.
Oh, there's a lobster on the front. We like lobster.
It's a steam-powered lobster.
Oh.
It's about a little boy's imagination when he comes on vacation to Maine, and he sees things in a blown-up, exaggerated way. And also, you can get a Flatlander's Guide to Maine. It's in stores, and that's my humor book about living in Maine. And I'm currently looking for a publisher for my middle grade novel.
Oh, okay. That's excellent. That's excellent. So it's been fabulous having you guys on the show. I mean, it's always a good, fun conversation.
I've learned a lot.
Me too.
Yeah.
Going to have to find out how to skin a moose.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah. You just drop them in a pot of boiling water. Won't be any problem.
They don't turn red, throw them away.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, please. I do want to mention again that this is our Funathon time. And the news and public affairs shows, such as this one, I have a book giveaway for Funathon. Everyone who calls to pledge during a news or public affairs program this week will be entered into a drawing for the book. And the book is This Changes Everything, Capitalism versus Climate by Naomi Klein, award-winning author of No Logo and The Shock Doctrine, and contributing editor to Harper's Magazine. You can also just be in the drawing without pledging, or if you are a sustaining member. So please call in your pledge and get into the drawing. It's 1-800-643-6273. And the winner's name will be drawn this Friday afternoon at 5 o'clock, just before Democracy Now! We thank you for supporting news and public affairs and programming on WERU. So we still have a few more minutes. What do you guys, after these books come out, what are you going to do next? You going into poetry? Is that what I hear?
Well, I'm already working on a second set of short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I'm also writing a novel. I actually started writing this novel back in 2007 and just kind of put it on the shelf, and I've recently pulled it down, dusted it off, and so I'm working on that. But I work for a living. I'm a working man, so I only have so much time to devote to that. So it's a work in progress.
Right. Is it a mystery?
It is. It's a murder mystery.
Ooh.
Takes place in Millinocket.
Oh, okay. Okay. And John, you've just got stories.
I'll tell you, there's so
stories.
many there that, every time I write one of them, I feel like I'm reliving that career all over again. So it's helped me along mentally, and it's the real thing.
Yeah, and they're fabulous stories, and it helps. Like, each of you write your stories, but it also helps preserve a lot of Waldo County that some of us remember.
And some want to forget.
I mean, I grew up in Waldo County. I don't remember coyotes. I don't remember turkeys. I mean, turkeys you got in a store. You know, now, like, you have to...
84. We brought 32 birds to Waldo County and let them go with the Wickham Fire.
That's right.
And,
That's right. Yeah.
I see 84 across the street or across the road at one time sometimes.
No, it's amazing. It's
1984 is when they came. That's
I know.
It's amazing how they've thrived.
Yeah. I'm happy for them, I guess.
I'm not.
I know, yeah. And you definitely have things you can't do to them, But for the past hour, you've been listening to Writers Forum on WERU-FM, 89.9 in Blue Hill and 99.9 in Bangor. I'm your host, Ellie O'Leary. Our guests today have been Mark Scott Ricketts, Mitch Littlefield, and John Ford. Please don't forget to give the pledge line a call at 1-800-643-6273. We always appreciate your support. We'd love to hear from our listeners. If you listen to Writers Forum and would like to present your work, published or unpublished, please notify the station. Call WERU at 469-6600 during business hours, or send an email to info@weru.org. You can also find us on Facebook at Writers Forum on WERU-FM. Please be sure to listen in on the second Thursday of every month from 10 to 11 a.m., also streaming live on WERU.org, where all of our Writers Forum shows are archived, as this one will be. I'm your host, Ellie O'Leary. Thank you for listening today, and hope you'll be back next month.